The most powerful beings in the galaxy made the perfect weapon. They took away its fear, pain, and mercy. When it finally broke under the weight of what they made it, they threw it away like a broken machine. They never thought that what they thought was a problem was really a soul trying to stay alive. Dr. Ellen Hayes is my name. I worked as a junior xenobiologist at a research station in a remote area of space that had not yet been explored. I wasn't in the army. I was not a diplomat. I wasn't a hero. I was just a girl who couldn't walk past something that was hurting without stopping. And that one choice, one stubborn, illogical, deeply human choice, changed the future of two species forever. This is the story of valor. The stallion the galaxy threw away, the creature they called broken, and the soul I refused to give up on. And this is what happened when the people who threw him away came back to get him. I didn't go to the Veyrath sector on purpose. IT was on the rough edge of charted space, a place so empty and dark that even the trade routes stayed away from it. The stars out here were dim and cold, like dying embers in a gray sky. There were fields of debris that went on for thousands of kilometers. They were made up of broken hulls of old warships, drifting clouds of dead satellite clusters, and the mechanical graveyard of 100 forgotten wars. The few people who lived there called it the Scar. Not because of what was there, but because of what was left behind. Ellen Hayes had been stationed at Research Outpost Meridian 7 for 11 months. 11 months of sorting through alien plant samples, doing atmospheric tests on uninhabitable rock balls, and eating reconstituted protein packs that somehow tasted worse every week. She was 26 years old, had a PhD in xenobiology from the University of New Chicago, and had spent most of her academic career dreaming about the great discoveries that were waiting to be made at the edge of explored space. She had never thought about how lonely it would be. There were only a few people working on Meridian 7. There were 6 staff members, including her, one old transport shuttle, a communications array that worked about 60% of the time, and views from every window that made it look like the universe had given up. But Ellen was set in her ways. She had always been hard-headed. Her mother said it was her biggest flaw. Her dissertation advisor said it was her best quality. Ellen had never been completely sure which of them was right. She was doing a normal perimeter scan of the outpost's outer sensor grid that morning when everything changed. Normal work. The kind of task you could do even when you were half asleep, which was good. Because she had only had 4 hours of sleep and her third cup of coffee. The scanner made a noise. She almost didn't pay attention to it. The Scar kept pinging. Debris fell through the area all the time, setting off proximity alerts and making readings hard to read with ghost signals and metallic echoes. After 11 months, Ellen had a very good sense of which pings were important and which ones were just background noise in the sector. This one was different. She leaned in and squinted at the readout. The signal came from a living thing. Organic but only faintly, weakly, and far away. A biosignature hidden inside what the outer sensors first thought was a piece of hegemony waste disposal floating by. Ellen looked at it for a long time. Then she took her jacket. The galactic hegemony. Everyone in the explored galaxy knew the name. You either said it with respect or with fear, and the line between the two was always thin. The hegemony was the ruling body of 67 star systems. It was a group of 11 alien species that worked together in a strict hierarchy that put efficiency above all else. Making the most of resources. Tactical superiority. The mathematical perfection of every system they are in charge of. They weren't really mean. Cruelty suggested feeling, and feeling was something the hegemonies ruling 300 years ago. The Veil Council made sure that their governance model didn't include anything that would help them. They were just right. Not warm. Transactional in a way that made human bureaucracy seem warm and sentimental in comparison. The military doctrine they had was the most studied and feared in the whole galaxy. The Veil didn't just make weapons. They planted them. Their best work was the stallions. Not horses in the way that people thought of them. Not really. The first human xenobiologists to see them called them stallions because they saw their long, muscular limbs, deep chest, arched neck, and proud bearing and thought of the closest thing they could think of in their own frame of reference. The Veil called them something that meant burden carriers of the forward edge. Creatures made from a species that lives in a world with a lot of gravity in the Tethran cluster. They are huge, strong, and have 4 limbs. Their base form was already very strong before the Hegemony's biological engineers got to them. When the engineers were done, they were scary. Armored hide that could stop low-caliber projectiles from hitting. Legs that can cover 30 meters in one step. Neural enhancement lattices ran through their whole nervous system, letting Veil handlers send commands directly to the creature's mind with perfect accuracy. And maybe the worst thing was that they could send out low-frequency psychic waves that could confuse and disable living things within a 20-meter radius. The Hegemony had sent them to 17 different worlds to act as frontline shock troops. They worked very well, and when they broke, when the neural lattice fell apart or the creature's mind cracked under the stress of constant battlefield improvement, the Hegemony's response was just as precise. They threw them away. Ellen got to the outer airlock in 7 minutes, put on her suit in 4, and launched the outpost's only scout pod, which was for 1 person, in 12 minutes. It was on its way to the biosignature. The signal took her to the edge of a pile of debris that was about 40 kilometers from the outer hull of the outpost. She carefully steered the scout pod through pieces of broken glass that were floating around. Hegemony disposal containers. The sector got random dumps of Hegemony waste, which were the byproducts of a civilization that was too efficient to care about what it threw away. She almost didn't see him. He was half buried under the wreckage of a decommissioned cargo module, and his dark body was pressed flat against the debris. It was so still that her scanner had to run 3 separate checks before it was sure the biosignature was still active. Ellen put her face up to the pod's front window and looked at him for the first time. And even from 30 meters away, even through the scarred plasteel of the viewport, and even in the cold gray light of the scar's dying stars, she felt something change inside her chest. He was very big. Even though he was crumpled up with his legs crossed and his head hanging down, she could still see how big he was. His skin was dark, a deep, mottled charcoal that changed slightly to green in some light angles. It was covered in the faint geometric patterns of the Hegemony's armor plating grafts. 4 legs, like the human frame of reference said, but each leg was almost as thick as Ellen's body and ended in broad hooves that were even stronger thanks to composite impact plating. His neck was long and bent, or used to be. At the moment it was hanging low, almost touching the trash below him. Even through the viewport you could see him breathing. It was shallow and hard, and each exhale left a faint cloud of vapor in the cold vacuum that the suit's environmental seals on his body were clearly having trouble keeping. You could see the neural enhancement lattice along his neck and shoulders. It was made up of strands of bioluminescent material woven under the skin that were supposed to glow a steady, coordinated blue when the system was working. They were flickering right now. In some places it's dark. In some places, it pulses erratically like a power grid that has short-circuited. He was still alive. Barely. Ellen typed something into her communicator. Hayes here, Meridian 7. I need Dr. Park in the medical bay ready for a big biological intake. And I mean on a very large scale. Then Dr. James Park's voice, tired and confused, said, Ellen? It's 0600. What did you discover? She kept an eye on the stallion through the window. He hadn't done anything. But as she watched, his head moved a little and one big eye, which was tired and in pain, slowly turned toward her pod. He gave her a look. Ellen Hayes, a xenobiologist, was 26 years old, very far from home, and the daughter of stubborn people. She made a choice that the galactic hegemony would later spend a lot of time and money trying to change. I found something they threw away, she said in a low voice. And I'm taking him home. It was a nightmare to get him inside. The outpost cargo bay was built to hold normal research shipments, like crates of equipment, specimen containers, and sometimes even big geological samples. It had never been made to hold a living thing that weighed about 2,300 kilograms, as Dr. Park's quickly recalibrated mass scanner told them. Ellen. Park stood in the doorway of the cargo bay and looked at the stallion as it lay on the reinforced loading platform, still barely awake. Ellen, I need you to tell me very slowly and clearly why there is a hegemony biological weapon in our cargo bay. Former biological weapon, Ellen said, not looking up from the portable med scanner she was running along the stallion's flank. They threw him away. He isn't a weapon anymore. He is a patient. For a moment, Park was quiet. The hegemony doesn't just throw away, They do when the neural lattice breaks. She did look up then, and the look on her face made Park stop arguing. James, look at him. Look at him, Ellen said. Ellen and the outpost's cargo management drone had a lot of trouble getting the stallion to lie on his side. His breathing had gotten a little better since they brought him inside and ran an emergency atmospheric stabilization. The Hegemony's biological engineering had made his lungs work in a variety of settings, which was the only reason he hadn't died in the debris field. His eyes were open and they were slowly and carefully following the people in the room, which showed that he was aware of what was going on even though he was in a lot of pain. The neural lattice flashed across his shoulders and neck. Ellen could see how bad it was up close in the bay's light. Parts of it had gone dark. Some were firing in random bursts, which was not how they were supposed to be working together. She thought it looked like a nervous system that had been overloaded over and over again and then just left to spark and burn. She said quietly, "The lattice degradation is bad. They didn't treat him gently before they threw him away. The lattice was made to send command signals from veil handlers straight to his nervous system. When it breaks, the signals turn into noise because parts start firing at random instead of in order. Uncontrollable, constant noise in the brain. Imagine that every nerve in your body fires at the same time, with no pattern and no relief." For a moment, Park was quiet. "That sounds like torture." Ellen said, "I think that's exactly what it is. And I believe it's been going on for some time." She reached out and put her hand flat on the stallion's neck, just below where the lattice filaments were thickest under the skin. She hadn't really thought about it before she did it. It was an instinctive move like what you would do with any animal that was hurt and scared. The stallion became stiff. All of the muscles in his huge body tensed up at the same time. His head shot up, and that huge eye locked on her hand with such intensity that Ellen's hair stood on end. The lattice filaments on his neck flared up, sending out a flash of blue-white light that pulsed once, twice, and then went back to its normal rhythm. Ellen's hand didn't move, her heart was racing. Her brain was working on threat calculations at a very high speed, and she knew that this creature could kill her with one move and that she couldn't stop him if he wanted to. She kept her hand flat on his neck. "Steady. It's warm." "It's okay," she said in a low voice. Not because she thought he knew what the words meant, but she knew that tone could be understood by animals of all kinds. She had learned that from 3 years of working in the field with animals that weren't human. The calmness of the frequency and the rhythm of the reassurance. "It's fine. I won't hurt you. I know that everything hurts right now. I understand. But I won't make it worse." The stallion stayed still. Tense. Looking at her, the lattice blinked, and then very slowly his muscles started to relax. Not completely. Not even close. But that's enough. Ellen could feel the change under her hand, just enough to know that it was no longer rigid fear and was at least thinking about not being afraid. She heard Park let out a breath he had been holding for a while behind her. He said, "Okay," in a soft voice. "Okay. What do you want?" Ellen worked harder than she ever had in the next 72 hours. She hardly slept. She hardly ate. She made a temporary office in the cargo bay and wouldn't leave the stallion alone for more than the time it took to run to the small bathroom and back. The other 4 outpost staff took turns helping out. At first, they were reluctant, but as the stallion got better and his personality started to come through the pain and exhaustion, they became more invested. The Hegemony had given him a name, which was a string of letters and numbers that matched his production batch and neural enhancement series. Ellen looked at it once in the data fragment she had found in his discard manifest, and then she put it away. She gave him the name Valor. She wasn't sure why though. The first time she saw him try to stand on his second day in the outpost, his legs were shaking badly from the neural disruption, and the lattice was firing in bursts that clearly hurt him with every step. But he still tried. He fell down. He gave it another shot. He fell again. He lay there for 10 minutes, breathing hard, and then he tried again. Courage. It felt right. The rehabilitation process was mostly made up on the spot because Ellen's xenobiology training didn't go into detail about the neural lattice systems of Hegemony biological assets. He was using first principles, the few academic papers that had been written about recovered Hegemony specimens, and the best research tool she had, careful patient observation of Valor himself. she slowly learned that the lattice was made to be overridden. To send commands from outside and have those commands take over Valor's own neural signals. His own gut feelings. His own will. The system had been set up so that the handler had complete control. This meant that Valor's own neurological agency had been systematically suppressed for the entire time he had been in hegemony service. The break didn't just hurt the lattice. In a horrible and unintentional way, it had given him back something the hegemony had taken away for years. That IT had brought him back to life, that he didn't know what to do with that. On day 9, there was a real breakthrough. Ellen was in the cargo bay's corner, working on her portable console and comparing the patterns of lattice degradation. That's when she heard a sound she had never heard before. Not very high. She could feel it in her chest more than she could hear it. It was almost subsonic. She raised her head. Valor was up, standing correctly for the first time since she brought him in. All 4 legs were under him, his head was up, and his neck was arched in a way that even Ellen's untrained eye could tell was natural and not forced. He was staring at her. The lattice filaments on his neck and shoulders were also glowing. Not the painful random flickering of the last 9 days. A soft, steady, coordinated pulse that is slow and rhythmic like breathing. Ellen carefully put her console down. She stood up and walked slowly toward him, keeping eye contact the whole time. She moved with the calm, deliberate pace she'd been practicing since day 1. She stopped about 2 meters away. Valor bowed his head. Not a move to protect yourself. Not a threatening stance. He slowly and carefully lowered it until it was at Ellen's eye level. And then he pushed it forward until his breath was warm on her face. The deep sound below the sound waves got deeper. Ellen felt it in her jaw, sternum, and the backs of her eyes. She couldn't put her finger on what it was, and she couldn't explain it in purely scientific terms. It felt like recognition, even though she knew she should be objective in her work. Like being noticed. She put both of her hands on either side of his face. The lattice flared up once, bright and warm, and then it settled into the softest, most steady glow she had ever seen. "Hey," she said in a low voice. "There you are." 6 weeks after Ellen brought Valor to Meridian 7, Dr. Marcus Webb showed up. Webb was a senior xenoneurologist in the Hegemony Studies Division of the Interstellar Science Consortium. This was the closest thing humanity had to an official academic body that studied hegemony biology. He was 53 years old, very smart, very doubtful, and he had traveled 3 weeks from the consortium's main facility based on the first report. Ellen had sent him something that he had called either the most important xenobiological discovery in 10 years or a terrible violation of interstellar containment protocol. In his response message that he came with 2 research assistants, a lot of specialized scanning equipment, and a look on his face that said he was ready to be let down. For a long time, he stood in the doorway to the cargo bay without saying anything. Valor was in the middle of the bay. His posture was alert but calm. His head was up, his ears were forward, and the lattice was running its quiet, steady rhythm across his neck and shoulders. He looked at Webb with the direct, judging look that Ellen had learned to expect from him when he saw something new. Not fear, not aggression, but a careful evaluation. Then he looked at Ellen, who was standing next to him, and made the low sound that was below the range of human hearing. "He's checking in," Ellen said without thinking. Then she stopped herself. Scientific accuracy haze. "I've recorded that sound happening every time he sees something new. He makes it and then turns to face me. I think he's using it as a guide. He is comparing his reaction to the new stimulus with mine." Webb was quiet for a little while longer. Then, "You've been here for 6 weeks with a hegemony Tier 4 biological asset, and you're telling me that he is using you as an emotional reference point?" "Yes. A creature that was made to stop people from processing their own emotions. Was engineered," Ellen said. "The lattice fracture messed up the protocols for suppression. For the past 6 weeks, his own neurological baseline has been coming back. The independent processing isn't just coming back, it's speeding up." Webb looked at her. "Show me it all." Even Webb eventually agreed that the data was amazing. There had been theoretical research on the neural lattice and hegemony biological assets for decades, but specimens that were found were almost always either dead or too damaged to be useful for analysis. According to Webb's research, Valor was the first living Tier 4 asset to go through structured rehabilitation outside of hegemony control. The results were not what the existing models had predicted. Webb said during one of the long nights they all spent around the cargo bay console while Valor slept in the corner, the conventional understanding is that the neural lattice and the creature's native neurological system are in competition. The lattice wins because it was made to do so. So when the lattice breaks, it is expected that the underlying neurological system is too weak to work on its own again. The creature really doesn't have any self left to get back to. He pulled up a side-by-side comparison on the console. Ellen's degradation mapping from day 1 and the full scan from that morning. This isn't what we're seeing, he said, and even though he was trying to be scientific, he couldn't hide how excited he was. The system underneath isn't getting weaker. It's not active. And it's not just going back to work. It's getting reorganized. The neural pathways are making new connections much faster than what has been seen in baseline specimens of this species. Dr. Park asked, why? We think this is why. Webb put the neurological map on top of the behavioral log that Ellen had been keeping since day 1. Time stamps for interactions. Events that involve contact. Talking to each other. The record of 6 weeks of daily, persistent presence that has built up. The reorganization speeds up as positive social interactions happen more often. Every time Ellen makes sustained contact, through voice, touch, or closeness, the scans taken in the next 12 hours show a measurable increase in the rate of new neural pathway formation. For a short time, the room was quiet. Ellen said slowly, human emotional engagement is actively driving the neurological recovery. The main idea, Webb said carefully, is that the original species was very socially connected before hegemony changed it. Based on a herd. Neurologically predisposed to social connection as a fundamental operational condition. The lattice stopped that attuning because it didn't work with handler control protocols. But the underlying ability was never taken away, it was just kept down. And now that the suppression is broken, Ellen said, he's reaching for what he was always meant to be. Webb turned to her. Then for the first time since he got there he smiled. It was small and a little hesitant, like a man who didn't fully trust the feeling but couldn't stop it. That is a formulation that is not very scientific, Dr. Hayes. But is it true? Pause. But correct. Ellen learned more and more over those weeks that what the hegemony had done to Valor, and to all of their biological assets, was a kind of systematic spiritual engineering. They didn't just change his body. They carefully took apart everything that made him unique and replaced it with things that worked. His pain response had been set to a level that wouldn't interfere with his behavior. He could be hurt or in pain, but the lattice would make sure he kept working. His fear response had also been changed. It wasn't gone, but it was redirected so that it turned into aggression on command instead of the instinct to protect himself. His ability to bond with others, an innate need for connection that Webb's analysis was now revealing, had been completely suppressed because a creature that formed bonds could refuse a command. They had turned a living being with amazing abilities into a tool. They threw the tool away when it broke. Here's what gets me, Ellen said one night as she sat on the floor of the cargo bay with her back against the wall and Valor lying nearby. She could feel the heat coming off his huge body. They said the lattice fracture was a failure. Their own post-discard analysis, which I got from the manifest data, said, neurological integrity below operational threshold, rehabilitation cost ineffective, discard authorized. They did the math and found that replacing him would cost less than fixing him. She stopped. But the break is what let him come back. If it weren't for that, the suppression would have lasted forever. The flaw in their system let him be himself again. The sound was made by Valor. It had changed over the weeks, with different frequencies, lengths, and rhythms. Ellen had carefully mapped these changes against behavioral context until she had something like a basic vocabulary. She linked this particular variant to what she had privately begun calling agreement, which was a response he gave when he seemed to understand the emotional content of a situation. She put her hand on his neck and leaned over. The lattice glowed with a steady, warm light. The scar's cold stars burned in the dark outside the viewport. Neither of them knew what was going to happen. The proximity alarm went off at 0347 station time, 11 weeks after Ellen found Valor in the wreckage, that IT went off while Ellen was sleeping. She was already up and moving before she was fully awake. The alarm's frequency cut through her sleep with the trained urgency of someone who had spent 11 months on a skeleton crew outpost where alarms were never trivial. It took her only 90 seconds to get to the operations center. She was still putting on her jacket when Park got to the main console. His face was pale in the blue light of the sensor display. She asked, "What is it?" "Hegemony signature." Park's voice was under control, but just barely. "Fleet class. There are 3 ships, maybe 4. The sensors can't tell for sure because they're running a dispersion pattern." Ellen's stomach dropped. "A dispersion pattern is a formation for combat." "Yes," Park said. "It is." She walked up to the console next to him. The sensor display made it easy to see the incoming signatures. They were big and powerful, and their energy output was typical of Hegemony warship class designations she had seen in academic databases. They were coming from the area where the debris was. Coming from the direction where Valor had been thrown away. "They felt him," she said softly. "What?" "The ability to send out psychic energy." Webb wrote that Valor's output has been going up as the lattice stabilizes. He said it was still low enough that it shouldn't go far, but Hegemony sensors are set up to pick up that exact signature. She turned her back on the console. They could feel him coming back online. They know that one of their assets is working in this area. "Ellen." As she turned, Park grabbed her arm. "Ellen, pay attention to me. This is a fleet of Hegemony ships. We are a research outpost with 6 civilians. They threw him away, if they wanted to take him." Her voice was flat. "They don't get to just, interstellar law doesn't say that." "I know what interstellar law says." She got her arm free. "Not mad. Just sure. Wake everyone up. And get Webb. I need him at the controls." She walked to the cargo bay. Valor was up. When she walked in, he was standing up. It wasn't the relaxed, easy stance of the past few weeks. It was something older and more cautious, with his weight forward, his head high, and his ears sharp. The lattice was running at a frequency she had never seen before. It was brighter than the calm glow of the past few weeks, moving faster, and the pattern was changing in a way that looked almost like active scanning, that he had felt them before the alarms went off. She was sure of it. "I know," she said. It wasn't a question. He looked at her. The lattice flared up brightly once, and the sound that came from him was lower, longer, and had a lot of different frequencies that she couldn't figure out right away. But the meaning was in his eyes, in how he turned completely toward her, and in how his huge body blocked the door. She had learned enough about him to read that he was standing between her and whatever was coming. "No," she said with certainty. She walked around him on purpose until she was standing in front of him and looking right at him. "No. This is not how it works. I'm not hiding behind you." He looked her in the eye. The lattice throbbed. She said, "I found you. I stood between you and everything that wanted to write you off as hopeless. This is how it works. That's the deal." She reached up and put both of her hands on his face, just like she had done that first real breakthrough morning. She could feel the lattice getting warmer under her hands. "I'm going to talk to them first. You let me go first." "Okay. A long time. The longest amount of time." Then Valor bowed his head just like he had done on the 9th day, slowly and on purpose. "Not giving in. Never give in. Recognition. I understand. But I won't leave your side," Ellen said. "I wouldn't want it any other way." 40 minutes later, the Hegemony ships fell into the range of close-range sensors. There are 3 ships. The biggest ship, the command vessel, was a Vale-class strategic carrier. It was a blunt, heavily armored shape that made Meridian 7 look like a pebble next to a boulder. The 2 ships on the sides were Corvette class, which means they were lighter and faster. They were in the classic retrieval formation that the academic databases called Asset Recovery Protocol. They didn't fire. Ellen had briefly let herself hope that they would just talk to each other, that there would be a conversation, a deal, or something like that that didn't end in violence. Before she could reach for it herself, the communication channel opened. The outpost's standard Vale language module turned the voice into flat, perfectly correct English. It also had the sound of someone who wasn't used to explaining themselves. This is Warlord-designate Sareth from the Hegemony Reclamation Fleet. You have biological property that belongs to Hegemony. Identify yourself and get ready to transfer assets. Ellen typed in the response channel. Webb was next to her, and she could see Valor standing at the entrance to the cargo bay behind her. She had opened the internal bulkhead so he could see the operations center, her, and the connection she knew he was using. This is Dr. Ellen Hayes from the Interstellar Science Consortium Research Station Meridian 7, she said. Warlord-designate Sareth, the thing you're talking about was found in your discard manifest 11 weeks ago. The Kareth Compact's Abandoned Biological Materials section says that it only applies to organic waste that doesn't have a mind of its own. Your asset is a Tier 4 system. It doesn't fall under the rules for civilian salvage, Webb said quietly behind her. The Kareth Compact has a sapience threshold clause. If the biological entity shows independent cognitive function above a certain level, Ellen kept her eyes on the sensor display showing the 3 warships. Warlord-designate Sareth, I am ready to give you the full neurological documentation put together by Dr. Marcus Webb of the Xenoneurological Research Division. This documentation shows that the entity you are talking about has above-threshold independent sapient cognitive function. Article 7, Section Dr. Hayes of the Kareth Compact says that the sapience threshold clause applies. The voice didn't change in pitch or volume, but there was something about it that made the room feel a little colder. It had a weight and a sense of finality. I am not here to talk about legal frameworks with a junior researcher at a small outpost. Hegemony owns the asset. It will be moved. You can only control whether or not that transfer happens with your help right now. The operations center is quiet. Ellen looked at the display on the sensor. She stared at the 3 ships of war. She looked at the information on the secondary console. It was Webb's documentation, 11 weeks of careful scientific record, and the most complete neurological profile of a recovering Hegemony biological asset ever put together. She thought about Valor on the first day, when she could barely breathe in the debris field. She remembered day 9, when his head dropped toward her for the first time. She thought about all the days that had passed in between, when she had to slowly and patiently show a creature that had been used and thrown away that the universe had more to offer than pain and obedience. She typed in the communication channel again. Warlord-designate Sareth, she said. With all due respect, he is not an asset. Valor is his name. And I strongly suggest that you think about your plan again, because the thing you made to follow your orders without question has been learning how to make its own choices for 11 weeks. A break on the channel. Short. The first time she'd heard someone hesitate. Get ready to board. The boarding team came through the docking collar at the outpost's secondary airlock. There were 12 Veil soldiers in full tactical harness, each carrying neural suppression weapons made just for Tier 4 asset containment. They moved with the precise efficiency of soldiers who had done this many times before and were used to it. A Veil commander named Field Officer Drav led them. He was tall and angular, with the gray-green skin and wide-set compound eyes that are typical of the Veil species. He had the look of someone who thought this job was just a minor administrative hassle. Ellen met them in the main hallway, where she was alone and standing right in their way. Dr. Hayes. The translation module on Drav's phone made his voice sound just as flat and precise as Sareth's, but with less authority. Please move out of the way. The Sapience Threshold documentation has been noted and will be reviewed through appropriate legal channels after asset transfer is complete. He told her to move with a gesture. Get out of the way, Doctor. Ellen said, I want you to understand something, and she didn't move. Her voice was calm. Her heart was beating about twice as fast as it should have been, but her voice was steady. This was because she had been raised by stubborn people and had their gift of calm in times when it mattered. Valor is not what he used to be to your documents, your laws, or your recovery plans. Since the lattice broke and you threw him away, he hasn't been that way. Your system doesn't have a category for what he is now, which means that your suppression weapons, she pointed to the pulse emitters in the soldier's hands, are set to a neural signature that doesn't exist anymore. Drav looked at her for a second. That's an interesting idea. He looked down the hall past her. Step aside. She didn't do it. Last warning, Doctor. Ellen said, I know. Valor then left the cargo bay. The effect was quick and amazing. At the same time, every soldier in the hallway took a step back. It wasn't a planned retreat, it was a reflexive response from beings whose survival instincts had just gotten a clear signal. Valor was on full alert, in open space, and moving with the full intentional authority of a creature that had found its own will again. This was very different from what they had been trained to do. The lattice was on fire. Not the soft glow of recovery that we've seen in the past few weeks. Ellen had never seen him do this before. A full-output coordinated blaze that ran from his neck to his shoulders to the full length of his flanks. The bioluminescent filaments cycled through the fast, complicated pattern of active operation. But the pattern was wrong by hegemony standards and wrong by every specification in their operational databases, because it wasn't responding to a command signal from the outside. It was completely made by itself. Valor stopped next to Ellen. His shoulder was at the same height as her eyes. Even from where the soldiers were standing, they could feel the heat coming off the active lattice. He looked at Drav with a level of attention that was completely, unmistakably intentional. It wasn't the focused threat lock of a weapon system locking onto a target. It was the careful evaluation of a thinking being making a choice about a situation. Drav raised his hand to get the weapons that would stop him. "Field officer," Ellen said in a sharp voice. "I just told you that those are set to a neural signature that doesn't exist anymore. If you fire them at his current configuration, the discharge interaction will happen." Drav fired. The suppression pulse hit Valor's lattice, and the interaction was exactly what Ellen had predicted and what she had hoped would not have to happen. The pulse was meant to send an override signal through the neural lattice, which would force the asset to stop working on its own and go into standby mode. It worked well with a hegemony standard lattice, which was mechanically sound. Valor's reorganized, self-directed, 11-week rebuilt neurological architecture was something it wasn't made to deal with. It came across a mind that was already busy. The pulse hit the lattice, and instead of falling apart from the override signal, it absorbed it. Put it through the process. The lattice flared white for one brilliant, complete second, with every filament at its highest output. Then the override signal came back out. Not as a weapon. Not as an attack.sa show. The low-frequency output that Webb had been recording for weeks, which had been slowly getting stronger as Valor got better, came out in one big, focused pulse that went through the walls of the outpost like they weren't there. The 3 hegemony ships outside, every neural interface system, every piece of technology made to connect with and control biological assets, went dark at the same time. In the hallway, all of the soldiers' tactical harnesses stopped working. For a short time. Drav tripped. A few of the soldiers let go of their guns. Valor stood. "Be calm. So. The lattice is going back to its strong, steady burn." He stayed still. He hadn't charged yet. He hadn't hurt anyone. He had only used the right amount of force to stop the attack. For a long time, the hallway was very quiet. Then Drav looked at Ellen with a look that she had never seen on a Veil face before, unsure. "What?" he started. "He made a choice," Ellen said in a low voice. "That's what that was. Not a programmed answer. Not a command for a handler. A decision. He decided not to hurt anyone. He decided to end the threat with as little force as possible." She stopped. "Your system doesn't have a place for that, does it?" 3 hours later, Warlord-designate Sareth came to Meridian 7 in person. He had only one bodyguard with him, and they weren't armed or in a tactical formation. Ellen had been expecting another show of strength, so she was quietly and cautiously surprised when there wasn't one. Sareth was older than she thought from his voice or the Veil equivalent of older. His compound eyes were a little more cloudy, and his angular frame carried a lot of authority in a way that was clear across species. He walked through the outpost like someone who was gathering information, looking at everything, the cargo bay, the equipment, Webb's documentation on the console screens, and the behavioral logs, before finally looking at Valor. He stood in the doorway of the cargo bay and stared at the stallion for a long time. Valor turned around. The lattice had a quiet, self-made rhythm. Not mean. Not showing. Simply present. The neural signature of a mind that was completely and safely itself. "Your documentation," Sareth finally said, suggests that the recovery was mostly due to a strong emotional bond with the human subject. Yes, Ellen said. Our models showed that species couldn't form meaningful emotional bonds with other species at a neurological level. Not with Tier 4 assets. Webb said from the corner where he'd been sitting quietly, your models were built on data from assets whose bonding capacity had been suppressed. You never had a starting point. You didn't know what they could do because you never let them show you. For a moment, Sareth was quiet. He looked at Webb, then Ellen, then Valor, and then back to Valor. He said, the thing that happened in the hallway. Field Officer Drav's report says that the asset chose a non-lethal response after being shot at. Yes. Our standard assets don't make that distinction. Handlers choose the pathways for both lethal and non-lethal responses. I know. This one was chosen on its own. Yes. Another quiet moment. Sareth walked into the cargo bay slowly and on purpose. His escort started to move forward, but he stopped them with a wave. He walked by himself from the door to where Valor was standing and stopped 3 meters away. Valor looked at him. The lattice stayed still. He was alert but not aggressive, just like he always was when he saw something new. Sareth stared at him for a long time. Then he bowed his head, which Ellen later learned from a Vale cultural database she found after the fact was the Vale way of saying, I see you, to someone who is equal to you. Not very deep. Not willing to submit. Just, acknowledged. Valor stood still for a moment. He then bowed his head in response. Ellen stood still and watched. She heard Webb take a long, slow breath next to her. Sareth stood up straight. Looked back at Ellen. The Sapiens Threshold documentation, he said. You will send a full copy to my ship. Yes. The review of the Careth Compact will take time. There are political reasons for this. This case would set precedents. He stopped. I would suggest that the entity stay here during the review period. Your team will take care of it. Ellen said, I wasn't going to let him go anywhere. Sareth's face changed. It wasn't a smile, and it wasn't something she could relate to directly, but it was clear that it was a sign of respect. No, he said. I didn't think you were. The weeks after the Hegemony's visit were strange and like they were on hold, like they were holding their breath between what had happened and what would happen next. The compact review process went through its political machinery at the same slow, complicated pace as all interstellar legal processes. The results were always uncertain for longer than anyone was comfortable with. Webb worked hard to put together the most complete scientific submission the review board would get. He built the neurological case for sapient status not just for Valor, but also for every Tier 4 and possibly Tier 3 biological asset the Hegemony had ever used. It was a big legal and political bombshell. Everyone got that. No one acted like it was different. Ellen paid attention to Valor. She had thought there was less to do there than there really was. The physical and neurological recovery that had happened in the first 11 weeks was amazing, but it was only the beginning. The deeper work, the kind she couldn't understand until she saw what he was becoming when she confronted the boarding team, was something else entirely. Valor was learning how to be a person again. It sounded easy. Ellen had never seen anything do anything harder than this. She didn't know how old he was when he was taken. The Hegemony's discard manifest didn't include any information about where he came from. He had been shaped for one purpose. He had built every skill, every ability, and every way of responding around that goal. The goal was no longer there. The people who were in charge were gone. The command signals were no longer there. And he was left with the question that she thought was the scariest one a mind could face. Who am I when I'm not what I was made to be? She didn't try to help him figure it out. By now, she had learned enough to know that wasn't her job. Her job was to be there while he worked it out, to be the point of reference he had first used on day 9, the steady, known thing he could look to while his own world changed around him. She had a conversation with him. All the time, patiently, about everything. Her work, her memories, the ongoing compact review, what Webb had for breakfast, and how the dim stars of the scar sometimes looked like salt on dark cloth. She didn't know how much of it he understood in a language sense. She didn't know if the words meant anything or if it was just the rhythm and the presence that got through. But the lattice did answer. All the time, the warm, steady pulse that she had mapped out over weeks into its own language. And slowly, with a patience that she sometimes thought was the best thing about him, better than the corridor incident, better than the psychic pulse that had shorted out 3 warships, he started to talk back. Not in words. The species lacked the vocal structure necessary for human speech, and his psychic emission ability was insufficiently refined for linguistic accuracy. But in how they act. He started to use his body, his gaze, his lattice output, and his physical closeness in planned, thoughtful ways to say things that were clear, specific, and his own. 3 weeks after the boarding incident, Ellen was sitting at her console going over compact documents. She had been sitting there in frustrated silence for over an hour. The legal language was hard to understand, the political subtext was even harder to understand, and the outcome was truly unclear in ways that made her stomach knot. She didn't realize how tense things had gotten until Valor walked over, stood next to her console, and put his head on her shoulder. He did this slowly and with the care and thoughtfulness that she had come to expect from him. She didn't move at all. His head was so heavy that she could barely hold it up. She could feel the warmth of the lattice through the thin fabric of her jacket and the low, slow grounding frequency of the subsonic sound. Something in her chest that had been tight for 3 weeks just let go. "Thank you," she said softly. The lattice throbbed with warmth. That night, Webb found her in the cargo bay, sitting against the wall with Valor lying nearby in his favorite position for resting. The lattice cast soft patterns of light on the walls. Webb put down 2 cups of coffee and sat down next to her on the floor. He said, "The review board has confirmed that they got the submission. In 2 weeks, the formal deliberation period will start. What do you think the chances are?" For a moment, Webb was quiet. He had the academic's knack for getting things just right, for never making promises he couldn't keep, and for being honest about not knowing. "I would have said low 3 months ago. There are strong political reasons for the hegemony to keep their asset classification framework." He stopped. "Now I remember the incident in the hallway." Saratha's answer. "It's not nothing that he came in person without weapons and treated Valor as an equal. In that cargo bay something changed for him." Ellen said simply, "He saw him." "He really looked at him." "Yes." Webb took his coffee. "That's funny, it turns out it does matter." Ellen smiled. Looked over at Valor. The lattice kept its quiet, steady beat in the low light. "It always did," she said. "The compact review board took 47 days to think about it. 47 days during which Meridian 7 became, for a short time and without warning, the most important address in the explored sector. Other scientists came, like xenobiologists, neurologists, legal scholars, and diplomats. The outpost pushed its infrastructure to the limit. Ellen dealt with the chaos with the same stubborn patience she had shown in everything else over the past few months. Valor watched the parade of newcomers with a calm, assessing attention that made more than one highly qualified visitor visibly nervous. Ellen thought it was good to see one particularly rude consortium legal observer quickly change his body language after Valor gave him a 5-second direct stare. A little pain can help you learn. At 6:12 a.m. on a Tuesday, the verdict came in. It was in a 53-page document that was clearly written by a group trying to satisfy 17 different political goals at the same time. Ellen read the first 6 pages and then went straight to the end. The review board finds, by a majority determination, that the entity designated Valor by the research team at Meridian 7 Outpost, formerly classified as Hegemony Biological Asset, classification string redacted, meets and exceeds the sapience threshold criteria established under Article 7 of the Kareth Compact, as amended. So, under Compact law, the entity is considered a sapient being and has all the rights, protections, and legal standing that come with that. The Joint Compact Hegemony Working Group will look into the question of the broader classification review of hegemony biological asset categories, tiers 1 to 5. Ellen read it twice. After that, she put the document down on the console and sat still for a moment. After that, she got up and walked to the cargo bay. Valor was awake. She had a theory, though it was never fully proven, that he didn't sleep very deeply when he knew she was awake and working at the outpost, as if their sleep patterns had become synced over the months. He turned to face her as she walked in. She walked across the bay and put both hands on his face, the way she always had, and looked up at him. "It's official," she said. She let her voice crack a little on the second word. "You are a person. You were always a person. But now the paperwork says so, which means that the people who wrote it have to act in that way." The lattice flared up, not the bright combat pulse of the corridor incident or the dim flicker of those first terrible days. It was something she had never seen before. A new design. It was complicated, with layers of frequencies she had already recorded and frequencies she had never heard before, all at the same time, all running together in something that was like, if not the direct translation of everything. All of it at once. The whole 11 months of it, from the beginning to now, shone in light. She put her forehead against his. The subsonic sound filled the cargo bay. It was warm and low, and Alan stopped trying to figure it out and just listened. The cold stars outside the viewport burned the same way they always did. But the room felt very different from the one she had been in 11 months ago, that first morning when she saw a proximity alert and, for some reason, decided it was important. Alan published 6 months later. The paper, which was co-written with Webb and had contributions from 3 other researchers who had worked at Meridian 7, was over 200 pages long and was simply and accurately titled Neuroplasticity and Sapient Recovery in Modified Biological Subjects. Evidence from a single case study with implications for hegemony asset classification. It became the most downloaded xenobiology paper in the consortium's history within weeks of being published. Not because of the science in it, even though that was amazing. Not because of its legal consequences, which were huge. But because of the story at its center, which was clearly and strongly human in its basic shape, even when told in the careful language of peer-reviewed science. A creature that had been used and thrown away. Someone who wouldn't look away. The slow, stubborn work of showing something broken that it could be whole again every day. The hegemony's response to the paper was calm and, by their standards, very well thought out. Sareth, who had gone back to his main job after the Meridian 7 visit but had, according to diplomatic sources, quietly influenced the outcome of the compact review, sent a formal statement to the Joint Working Group. When you take away the diplomatic formality, it was basically an admission that the hegemony's asset classification framework had an unexamined assumption at its core, that the ability for independent sapient development in their biological subjects had been permanently eliminated rather than merely suppressed. No, it hadn't. 4 months after Ellen's paper came out, the working group's first findings showed that the assumption had been wrong in the same way for many different types of hegemony biological assets. It would take years, maybe even decades, to fully understand the full meaning of what that meant, including its size, moral weight, and political complexity. Many consortium officials asked Ellen more and more urgently to take a formal role in the working group process. To leave Meridian 7 and go to the place where decisions were being made. She always said no, politely and firmly. She had to work at Meridian 7. Valor never went away. He could have done anything he wanted, because the compact recognition gave him full legal right to go anywhere and make any decision about his own future without having to talk to Ellen, the outpost, or anyone else. Several people wanted him to be at different places for different reasons. Ellen looked over all of these requests for him and then turned them down after talking about them with him. Their version of talking was nonverbal and required her to have a pretty good understanding of his lattice output and body language. He lived in Meridian 7. Ellen was the one for him. It was strange that the cold stars of the scar were his stars. For the first time in his life he looked happy. Not the programmed obedience that the hegemony had planned. It wasn't the lack of resistance that came from suppressing every independent impulse. But real, chosen, daily happiness. The kind that came from being exactly where you wanted to be, with exactly the people you wanted to be with. New researchers kept coming for long study visits. Valor was always patient with them. He would carefully look at each new arrival before deciding how much to engage with them on his own terms. He had favorites. Researchers who sat on the floor of the cargo bay with him, talked to him without the nervous formality that many visitors brought, and treated his attention like a conversation instead of a response to a study subject. He had ideas. About research proposals, about the coffee Ellen insisted on drinking even though Webb had been trying to get her to switch to something less caffeinated for a long time, and about which of the outpost's small mechanical systems needed maintenance before Ellen even noticed. He said these things using the words they had learned together over months, like lattice patterns, subsonic tones, and the exact calibration of his physical attention. Ellen heard them and answered them, and she sometimes felt a private warmth that she couldn't quite put into words. It was just a relationship. Not the researcher and the subject. Not the person who handles it and the asset. Not even exactly owner and pet, even though the galaxy had a hard time coming up with a better framework. Two people. People who shouldn't have met, from very different backgrounds, found each other in a debris field at the edge of explored space and decided, stubbornly and irrationally, against a lot of pressure from cold efficiency, interstellar law, and the math of cost-benefit analysis, that the other was worth the trouble. 14 months after Ellen had seen a proximity alert and decided it was important, she was standing at the outer viewport of Meridian 7, the wide one in the main corridor with the best view of the Scars field of dim stars and drifting debris. She was drinking her coffee and watching the sector wake up. Valor came and stood next to her. Technically he was too big for the hallway. He always had been. He was able to do it, though, with the careful precision of a creature that had learned to be very aware of the physical space he occupied. Ellen had privately noted that this was one of the more charming things about him. This giant armored being that moved through human-sized spaces with the delicate consideration of someone in a room full of things they didn't want to break. They were all together at the viewport. The lattice moved in a quiet way. The stars were cold and burning. "We changed something," Ellen said quietly. Not with joy. Just the facts. Admitting that something was true. Valor's head moved, a small nod that she had long since written down as yes, but I didn't know that was what I was doing when I came out here to get you. I just couldn't walk by. The sound that is below the sound. I know, she said in a low, warm voice. I know. I couldn't do it either. She rested her head on his shoulder. His warmth was real, solid, and familiar. The lattice shone softly and steadily at the edge of her sight. Outside the viewport, the Scars debris field moved in its old, slow patterns, staying quiet about everything it had seen, everything the galaxy had used up and thrown away out here, in the space between where things mattered and where nothing was supposed to. One of them had returned. The galactic hegemony got their power from one idea: efficiency over everything else. Replace something if it breaks. Throw away a living thing if it can't do its job. Do the math and see which is cheaper, fixing it or getting a new one. It is a way of thinking that runs whole civilizations. And it is a philosophy that doesn't have an answer for what Ellen Hayes did. She didn't do the math. She didn't add up the numbers. Instead, she looked at a creature that the strongest force in the galaxy had said was worthless and saw something worth saving. The hegemony's engineers never thought about that stubbornness, the deeply human, irrational, and inefficient refusal to look away from suffering. You can't put it in a neural network. You can't put it into a weapon system. You can't do a cost-benefit analysis of it. It is the most powerful and oldest technology that people have ever made. The desire to see. There are a lot of things in the universe that have been thrown away. There are a lot of people, animals, ideas, and possibilities that a cold and efficient calculus has said are beyond repair. But efficiency isn't the only thing that counts. A person who won't walk past can sometimes be the most powerful thing in the galaxy. Valor was aware of that. Ellen showed it. And in the cold stars of the Scar, on a small outpost that was never meant to matter, the galaxy learned it too.